The Civil War is often thought of as a man's war. While that is the case for a lot of wars, hundreds of women had various roles in the Civil War. This was the first time that a lot of women were able to realize that they could contribute to the war, because even just years earlier, women were not known to have a huge role in public life, such as fighting in wars. Women did play support roles in the war for the most part. For example, women started aid societies at the beginning of the war, and these provided necessities for soldiers when the government couldn't do so. So the government for both the Union and the Confederacy at the beginning of the war was not very organized in terms of outfitting their soldiers with the things they needed. So these aid societies, which mainly existed in the North, helped bring food, clothing, and cash to soldiers on the front lines that needed it. Yes, the main contribution in terms of support roles were that women were nurses in the war. A lot of women wanted to follow their husbands into service, and an easy way they could do that was be a nurse. And it wasn't like anyone could apply to be a nurse. Dorothea Dix, she eventually funded the Red Cross, but she was the Army supervisor for nurses. She wanted older women that wouldn't distract soldiers or behave in unfeminine ways, as she called it. And so those were ideal candidates for nurses. The main contribution that civilians, in this case specifically women, had toward the war was what is known as the Us Sanitary Commission. And this organization was basically in charge of improving hospital conditions and reducing disease and infections. And as I've said in previous videos, most of the deaths in the United States Civil War were due to disease rather than fighting in wars. So the formation of the U.S. Sanitary Commission was designed to help improve hospital conditions and reduce these preventable diseases and infections that were so deadly during the Civil War. And in addition to being nurses and at the beginning of the war being part of aid societies, women were also in support roles as laundresses, so people that did laundry for soldiers, and cooks as well. Any way women could help out the war effort, they would do so. And that definitely includes the Confederacy as well, as women in the Confederacy did this more on their own rather than in organized aid societies like in the Union. But both sides were very motivated to help the war effort. One aspect of the Civil War that does not get talked about a lot is that there were actually women soldiers fighting in the war. Estimates say around 450 to 700 women soldiers fought in the war. The reasons for fighting varied. As I've said previously, some women wanted to follow their husbands into war, and a way to do that was potentially to fight. Others were motivated by patriotism as well. And recent historians may have suggested that some women disguised themselves as men because they identified as men. And disguising themselves as men was easier than one would expect at the time because, among other things, the clothing was baggy, so you couldn't necessarily tell what a person's body shape was. Also, at the time, it is during what is sometimes known as the Victorian Era, although I think that's more for English history. It was customary for soldiers to sleep in their clothes, bathe alone, and basically just not be around soldiers when doing that type of other soldiers when doing that type of thing. So soldiers were not necessarily be able to tell if a soldier was a man or a woman simply because they were not around each other when they were bathing, and such as was the custom of the day. Some women eventually did get discovered. There are a couple accounts of this. And when a woman did get discovered, she would, for the most part, be sent home without punishment. There are cases where some women were punished. And there were actually a lot of nurses and doctors that did not turn in women. The main way women got discovered for disguising themselves as men was when they got injured. They would be at the hospital being treated for their wounds, and then the doctors and nurses caring for them would find out that they were in fact a woman. And a lot of these doctors and nurses did not turn people in. And then another important aspect of the war was that some women were spies, specifically Harriet Tubman. She is, as you may know, known for the Underground Railroad. Basically, she helped a lot of slaves escape the South for the North, and in some cases Canada, so helped escape slavery. Spies were a huge part of the war for both sides, and women were spies for both sides as well. There are a lot of well-documented networks of women spies. So if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe as well. Hit the bell for notifications. As always, feel free to comment what topics you would like me to discuss in future videos.